Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome back to the International Conference on Science Education and Teachers Development 2021. Today we will have 3 keynote address and follow with the parallelization. Now for the first keynote address, we will have Dr. Connie Sirconi from Monash University, Australia. And this session will be moderated by our head of ICT, Data and Evaluation Division. So I will pass this session to Mr. Lukman Nur Hakim.
Thank you so much, Ms. Amel, as our MC. Good morning, everyone, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now we are going to first keynote speaker, Dr. Connie Sirconi. Before we start, let me introduce Dr. Connie Sirconi. Dr. Connie Sirconi is a research fellow in the Faculty of Education at Monash University. She is an experienced educator with expertise in evidence-informed policy and practice, science and STEM curriculum and pedagogy, environmental and sustainability education, and also digital learning environments. Her career in education is characterized by systems-wide and international perspectives in teaching, learning, and policy. She has worked in K-12 schools, universities, regional and provincial governments, and nonprofit organizations to positively influence students' learning experiences through improved teaching and policy. On this occasion, Dr. Connie Sirconi will deliver Science Education 4.0, preparing K-12 students for a complex and fast-changing world. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Connie Sirconi. Time is yours.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Lukman, and to SEAMEO Qitep in Science for inviting me to this conference. And thank you to the science educators, including the nominees and the finalists who shared their best practices yesterday. And a special shout out to the team at SEAMEO, Dr. Indar Wati and her team. I miss you folks. I haven't seen you for a few years. So thank you for inviting me to your conference. Okay, so today I will talk about how science educators prepare students for a complex and fast-changing world. And I'm going to start with an overview of the industrial revolutions and recent education reforms. And then I'll talk about how are our students doing in science and STEM. And then I'm going to highlight 3 areas that science educators can focus on to prepare students for the 4th industrial revolution. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to ask for some audience participation. So I will invite you to reflect on your own practices, whether you're a teacher, a researcher, or a policymaker. So in the chat box, I have shared a link to pollev.com. And I'm just going to share my slides so you can also see what the address looks like on the screen. So I'm hoping everyone can see the slide. Is that okay, Mr. Lukman? Is my slide okay?
Yes.
Good. Technology is working. So you'll see on the bottom pollev.com, or in the chat line, you can access this link using your phone. You can see your phone or your laptop. Okay, so we're asking for audience participation. I've also shared with the organizers a series of PDFs and links that I will be highlighting during my presentation. So feel free to look at those and you can have a closer look after the presentation. Okay, so let's begin by practicing our audience participation. So where are you from? And I started with Canada. I'm actually from Canada, even though I'm in Australia. So just type in your answers here. I think you know how this works. The more people that are from a certain country, the bigger the word gets. Lots from Indonesia. Fantastic. So I will have a series of interactive questions throughout this workshop. So please take the time to get onto this website, polev.com/ConEC, and then you'll have a chance to share your ideas as we go. Oh, we've got Malaysia. That's wonderful. Brunei. Yes, very good. Keep them coming, folks. I'm just going to give you a minute so that you're all signed on. Oh, the Philippines. I have visited the Philippines too, and Indonesia. Singapore, welcome. Okay, I see. Maybe we have, I know we have some people from other countries, but I encourage you to sign on. We're going to move on to the next slide. So thank you for participating. There will be more questions coming. Okay. All right, the Industrial Revolution. So these are, I guess you can describe them as eras where there's been big changes in technologies that have impacted the way we live. Everything from how we manufacture things to how we travel, communicate, even our health or medicine, income and population growth. So these are 4 key industrial revolutions in our, I guess, our recent history. So Industrial Revolution 1, I think that's the one that's characterized by the invention of water and steam power. And then the second industrial revolution was called the technological revolution, believe it or not. And that involved things like the telegraph and railroads, electricity and assembly lines. You can imagine that was a big change in our history. And the third one, digital revolution, right? That involved computers, communication technologies, internet, robotics. And this is considered the age of information. And then the fourth one, which is said to start in about the year 2016, so just a few years ago. And that's with the advent of artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, big data, cloud computing, smartphones, smart factories, the Internet of Things, which includes devices that have sensors or softwares, integration of digital, physical, and biological systems, and machines making decisions. And this is considered the age of intelligence. So imagine we've gone from the age of information, having all kinds of information at our fingertips, to the age of intelligence, where we have machines helping us to make decisions and making decisions for us. So this is a big deal. So let's think about, well, what does this mean for education? Now, I've had a chance to connect with a couple people to talk about what this means. And the first person is a professor from Monash Business School, and he has an economic perspective. And of course, he mentioned what we all think about in Industry 4.0. Oh, there's going to be a loss of low-skilled jobs due to automation. But he also talked about, well, there's going to be more jobs that require people who are flexible and creative and collaborative and connected lifelong learners. So that was interesting. And then I spoke with another person, Mr. Tom Bentley, who is an executive director for policy and impact at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. And he's particularly interested in education system. And I asked him this question: how can schools equip learners to thrive in an Industry 4.0 workforce? And here's what he said. I'll just let you read through that. So that was very similar to what Professor Wilkie said, but even more detail, because it's connecting to more decision-making by the learners. And Tom also added, there's 2 great tests of schooling. He said the purpose of schooling is to be able to equip students to become lifelong learners and enable every student to apply what they learned in schools to outside of school. And he said if schools can achieve this, they will have addressed the expectations for Industry 4.0. So with this in mind, both are emphasizing the role of creativity, collaboration, and lifelong learning. And these are essential features in good education system. So let's reflect on these 4 industrial revolutions and think about, where is education at? Okay. So more audience participation. What era do you think education is currently at? So Industry 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, or 4? Oh, interesting responses. 2, 3, and 4. Maybe if you had a chance, you might pick all of the above. Okay. Very interesting. All right. Let's have a think about this. Before I explain the graphic, I will say Industry 1.0 was really, so you think about the 1700s, 1800s, that was, not everyone had access to education. So we were seeing an increase of access to education. And it was Industry 2.0 around that time when we started to see education at scale, like universal access or compulsory education, which is actually quite amazing in human history. However, we also see what's called the factory model of education. And some of you might already recognize this, this graphic. This is a very famous TED Talk that was given by Sir Ken Robinson in 2010. I've included the link in your resources. And he talks about the idea of the factory model of education, meaning the education systems really have not changed since, you know, the second industrial revolution, which means that the curriculum is organized by subject areas. The students are organized by age groups. So not ability or capability, but simply by their age. Curriculum is organized or standardized, as is assessment. And there's a strong focus on content and knowledge. So on one hand, you know, Education 2.0 is amazing progress towards universal education. But on the other hand, continuing in this way has had an impact on student learning engagement. And of course, a flow-on effect to how can we equip students for Industry 4.0? So the question is, how do we address this? And of course, the answer, as you know, in the 80s, governments and organizations were also worried about this. And they knew that focusing on content and knowledge is just not enough to equip students in such a fast-changing world. And that they need opportunities for deeper engagement. And so with this came the idea of competencies, 21st century skills and competencies. And the graphic you see before you was proposed by the World Economic Forum. This is from 2015. And you'll see in the middle, the orange box in the middle emphasizes what we know as the 4 C's. And some of the speakers yesterday were emphasizing their innovative science practices based on these 4 C's. So that's critical thinking, creativity, communication, and collaboration. And I think these are fantastic, and we are still globally trying to achieve these within our subject areas and across the curriculum. But let's see where education is at in terms of integrating these 4 competencies. Okay, science education. All right, well, we've seen over the years a consistent decline in students' engagement in science and STEM, not just going into high school, but also going into universities. And alongside this, we know that our approach to science education, despite innovative practices happening, you know, in certain classrooms, has not changed much since the 1950s. So for example, curriculum is still organized into biology, chemistry, physics, earth and space science. There's often a lot of topics to cover. There's still an overemphasis of content and knowledge. And there's still a thought that there's a single scientific method that students have to learn. And there's still an overemphasis of teacher-centered approaches. In fact, there's some really strong words by Jonathan Osborne and Dylan from the USA saying the overwhelming conclusion is that school science has failed. So here we have these wonderful competencies that we can demonstrate are fantastic in the science classroom, and yet we're not seeing that, over all of the experiences of science education, including student engagement. So if this is the case, what can science education offer to Industry 4.0? So that's what I'm going to talk about. In the following slides, I'm going to talk about what I consider are the three basics of science. So that's imagination and creativity, the languages of science, and inquiry-based approaches. So these three areas are integral for practicing science. And I'll talk about what these can look like in science classrooms, and then I'll invite you to reflect on your own practices. Okay, I'm just going to check the chat. Oh, people are just saying hello, but everything is okay. Good. All right, so let's go on. Let's start with imagination and creativity. Okay. And then I'm getting these things flashing up on my screen. Okay, imagination and creativity. So I think this is the heart of science, and I'm making a heart sign here. So it's not the hypothesis, it's not the scientific, but imagination and creativity is the heart of science. In fact, someone very important said, imagination is more important than knowledge. You probably have heard of that quote. So research into how scientists actually do science show that they use all kinds of approaches to understand our world and even beyond. So for example, astrophysicists, they use a lot of theoretical approaches. Biologists or molecular biologists use laboratory-based approaches or field studies. And across all this, there's many different ways that each of these scientists approach scientific inquiry. Okay, so this is a big contrast to how we perceive science, particularly in school science classrooms or in the public. People think science is a very structured process, and it does look like that when it gets written up in journals. However, when we are exploring our world and trying to make sense of it, it's a lot more messy. And the practices of scientists tell us that, yes, this is the case. So science is not always led by a hypothesis, and science does not always follow that stepwise approach. Flexibility and imaginations were deemed as really important for scientists, particularly for creating hypotheses and then addressing the results when it's not expected. And then there's a broad consensus that authentic science inquiry is a blend of logic and imagination. Now, I'm going to look in the direction of early childhood education. I'm going to thank my colleague, Dr. Glykyria Frakiadakis, for sharing her ideas with me in this space, because she is an early childhood education researcher. And this researcher is really giving a lot of good ideas about the role of imagination, creativity, and learning. So we'll start with imagination. So not in the everyday sense of the meaning, but imagination as a higher mental function. So that helps in the development of thinking. So in a sense, it's a tool that can help us explore and expand our reality and create new meaning. So in conjunction, we have creativity, which is considered a supplementary concept to imagination. And this involves moving from a concrete, like for example, observing a plant grow, to abstract ideas. For example, understanding how photosynthesis works and how there's chemical reactions that use energy from the sun and converts it to sugars within the plant. So concrete to abstract involves creativity. Now, the key here is that imagination and creativity are interrelated. So their development is actually intertwined. And this has really important implications for how we include imagination and creativity in education settings, and particularly for setting the foundations for critical thinking. And I'm going to point you to a very big research project that is happening at Monash University called Conceptual Play Worlds. And Professor Marilyn Fleer and her team of educators are looking at how creativity, imagination are fundamental for learning STEM. And they really advocate for the role of play-based approaches and student-centered approaches in learning. So this is not just for young children, but this is something that needs to be nurtured and developed as students go through school and even beyond. And I will also say that this group offers free online professional learning if you are interested in finding out about, what can we learn from early childhood research to help us with our creativity and imagination in STEM. So let's go back to the science classroom, and what can we do? Well, globally, the OECD is really taking a role in emphasizing creativity across all subject areas and including science. So that 2019 document actually does refer specifically to science education. So just take a minute to read that definition of creativity and think about it from the lens of a scientist or a science educator. So when I read this, I think, that's all about science, right? And if I read this as a science educator, it's like, I need to do more of that, in the classroom. Now they have, in this document, they have actually pointed to specific things we can do in the science classroom, and I've listed them here. So creativity is closely linked to science inquiry skills, and I'll be talking about that in a few slides. Of course, it involves student-centered and play-based approaches to encourage exploration of ideas. And it means that science educators need to give opportunities for students to engage in more open problem-solving tasks, and particularly in meaningful contexts. So less of the cookbook science and more open approaches. It also means students can practice creating hypotheses or address different solutions to different problems based on particular activities. Students can also suggest ways to improve experiments or even create their own experiments. So these are ideas we can do to ensure students have more experiences of creativity and ability to develop their imagination in science classrooms. So this section, I'll end off with this quote. I'll just give you a minute to read it. And it's a very powerful quote. Again, it's from the OECD, so it's looking at the broader goal for education across the world. And it's basically saying creativity is central for preparing our students for Industry 4.0. Okay, so let's reflect on your role of creativity and imagination. Do you consider creativity and imagination in your teaching, research, or policy role? We have a very creative group of participants at this conference, and I'm not surprised. And I will also point out, most of us are science educators here, but there are those of us here who are researchers, and the creativity in science and STEM is a relatively new research area, and it's very exciting. And in policy, there are things for you to think about how you can help support these activities to take place in the classroom, and particularly aligning with the aspirations coming from the OECD. Okay, good. Thank you. Now, the second area I'm going to focus on that I think science offers Industry 4.0 are the languages of sciences. All right, and I said languages because there's more than one language. So we're going to start with a thought experiment. These are very popular among astrophysicists, particularly, and other physicists. Okay, so I want you in your mind to explain the concept of lift. Okay, so you close your eyes, you can explain this concept in your mind. If we were face to face, I would get you to do it out loud. Okay, so some of you are probably saying it in your mind. Some might be thinking of a written explanation. Some of you might actually have pictures. But I'll go even further. You can actually use gestures to explain this, not necessarily in your mind, but you can do it right now. And if you have your a group around you, you can do a role play to demonstrate lift. If you have materials, you can build a model to demonstrate lift. So all of these are different representations of the concept of lift. And each of them show a particular aspect of that concept, right? If I say it, is very different from if I draw it. If I draw it, I can show certain things, but if I model it, I can show other things about it. So each of these show or hide an aspect of a concept. And the point is, to understand a concept really well, you need to be able to represent it in different ways. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is, scientific concepts are the sum of the representations that describe them. So this means, as science educators, it's all very nice, you know, to provide this to students, but what if the students actually create this themselves? So they actually draw their ideas about lift, and then they talk to other students to share their ideas and to critique each other's ideas. These are exactly the kinds of conversations you want to have in a classroom. This is the students actually speaking science through their representations. Okay, so the concepts are fundamental to understanding science and constructing representations. So one of the challenges for teachers is, well, what are the key science concepts in science? And sometimes this is not always easy to find in the curriculum, right? So this is one of the websites that I have used when I'm teaching science methods in university to help students identify particular concepts in life science, physical science, and earth and space science. So this is the Academy of Science in the United States. So this is freely accessible, and a link that I shared. And not only does it identify the concepts in each of these areas, but it also has information or research around what's called common misconceptions or alternative conceptions. So for example, if you think of an ice cube and particles in an ice cube, a lot of people will think, oh, particles are not moving in an ice cube. It's a solid, it's cold, there's no movement. But we know as science educators that particles are often, usually in some kind of movement. So this is a common misconception in classrooms. And if you could imagine, if you ask your students to role play, be an ice cube, you will see that they are initially very still. But when you talk about movement in all particles, then they will learn how to vibrate a little so that even solids have movement. So that's an example of understanding the importance of understanding concepts, and then understanding where do you think students will have troubles or misconceptions. And from that, you can help, this will help you plan activities to move students from their previous understanding to more of a scientific understanding. The point being is, you don't just ask the students to memorize, all solids all solid particles have movement, or all particles, they actually experience it. They share their prior understanding, and then they work through that process of developing the scientific understanding. So getting back to representations. So in science, you often use models or representations, so you can consider them as tools for thinking. And science uses a variety of tools for thinking, and we can create those experiences for students in our classroom. Sometimes the classroom tools won't be as technical as some of the tools that other scientists use, but they get the gist of what this looks like. And these tools actually help us go from the concrete to the abstract. So from the real world. You think of somebody studying geology, you can't always carry around all these rocks with you, but you can represent them in different ways, and that helps share the same kind of ideas and prompt those conversations and continue on with these ideas. And science, when I talk about the languages of science, I mean that science uses very disciplinary, specific tools and technologies to understand the world. So, as you see in the picture, the microscope is very common in a science lab. But these are tools of science, and it's important that students get experiences in using these tools and understanding that they really expand beyond our five senses. And in fact, our five senses are often misleading. So what we see is not actually what is. And that's one of the essences of science as well. So how does this play in, how does this roll out in a science classroom? So just to start, really important for educators to identify the concepts within the curriculum and anticipate the problems that students will have. And from this, you can plan a variety of activities and bringing in a different kinds of representations that students can create to help develop their conceptual understanding. And I'm going to emphasize the use of gestures because it's very common to use drawings as representations, and that's fantastic. But if you bring in gestures where students do gestures or they do role plays, you get what's considered a direct link from an abstract idea to your body, and that is also a new research area in learning through representations. I'll also pause there and emphasize when you do these representations with the students, the teacher gets an idea of what students know and where they have challenges. So it's kind of a formative assessment in a way. And of course, last year when the world pivoted to online learning, we started to become very interested in digital tools and technologies and representations. And there are some amazing animations and simulations, and of course, videos and multimedia presentations that students not only can view, but that they can build. And I will show you that in a few slides. So I will finish with this one last important point. When we think of Industry 4.0 in this conference, you're going to hear about amazing technologies that, of course, scientists already use. And then some of these we can use in our classroom, including a very simple smartphone. However, there's this myth of a digital native. So we think students are natural with any kind of digital technology, but in fact, they need to understand what it means to use this technology to learn scientific concepts. So as a teacher, we need to spend time teaching that. Okay, so quick quiz. Do you speak the languages of science? I love it. We've got 100%ers. The cool thing about the language of science, it's like the language of love. It's an international language. So that is a wonderful thing that scientists across the world can communicate with each other in this way. Okay. All right, we'll go to the next idea. So science inquiry. So this is the third area I wanted to focus on in terms of how science can help us prepare students for Industry 4.0. So science inquiry is kind of like magic. It brings together imagination, creativity, and the languages of science and more, which you'll see in the next few slides. And science inquiry has many faces. So the idea of scientific inquiry refers to how scientists conduct their practice. whereas inquiry teaching are the instructional approaches that teachers use. Inquiry learning is how students can learn through inquiry in ways that are similar to how scientists generate knowledge. And of course, there's inquiry as content. So that's those inquiry skills or this procedural knowledge of how to do science. Now, the biggest point I want to make is that the process and product, so the scientific inquiry and the scientific content, are interconnected. And this is actually not a new idea. It dates back to Dewey in 1910. Funny how some great ideas start off early and they get a little bit lost along the way. For example, in the 1900s, it was about student-centered approaches and focusing on social science for social problems. In the 50s, the race to space, we had teacher-led inquiry and a more economic focus on science inquiry. In the 70s, we went back to science, technology, and society, back to student-led inquiry around socially relevant problems. And then currently, from the OECD perspective, we're focusing on scientific literacy, which looks at particularly socio-scientific issues and developing our students, by students I mean K-12 students, as reflective citizens in the world. So we're in a paradigm of scientific literacy now. So this has implications for how we teach science, and particularly tying our content knowledge or our process to meaningful contexts as a way to engage students. So for example, physics, I know we have physics teachers here. If you're teaching conduction or reflection, you can teach in the context of drawing on STEM for sustainable housing designs, for example. Or if we're teaching about exponential growth in mathematics, we can draw the context of pandemics, where I think the whole world got a very quick tutorial on what exponential growth actually means. Now, one of the essential features of scientific inquiry is collaboration. So there's a bit of maybe it's another myth that people think, oh, you know, all the great scientists are these lone scientists working by themselves, and that's actually not true. Most scientists work in collaboration with other scientists, and sometimes in competition with other scientists. I think the fact that the world got the vaccine out so quickly was because science researchers were working in collaboration and ongoing communication. It was a bit of a medical miracle in some ways because of that. Now, collaboration can also happen across disciplines, as we see with STEM, and that solves the increasingly complex problems we have in the world, and as I mentioned before, internationally. And this collaboration is also seen as part of the peer review process in science, which is really important for validating scientific knowledge. All right, and that's all well and good for high-profile scientists, but are students meant to do this? Well, remember when we talked about students comparing their representations and talking about their ideas? In some ways, that is similar to a peer review, right? Because they're proposing their ideas through their representations, and their colleague is saying, oh, no, I don't think so. I think you need to think about this. So in that way, students get experience on this collaborative process and having their ideas challenged, and then going back to the table and saying, oh, maybe I need to rethink that. So in the science classrooms, these interactions are part of students' experience in the disciplinary languages and processes of science. And particularly, it highlights the social role of learning with that disciplinary practice of science. Okay, so this sounds all quite wonderful, and everyone should do inquiry, and we're all convinced, but I will say the idea of science inquiry in classrooms is quite controversial. So some of the research shows that there's fantastic benefits in terms of students engaging in science. As you know, that's one of the challenges of students in science is students' decline engagement. So they love that interactive. nature of inquiry. And their attitudes improve, which is fantastic. However, research also shows that there's a bit of a mixed impact on how do students learn better, right? So that's what makes inquiry a bit controversial. And that those mixed results on students' achievement is often attributed to the research design. It's attributed to the complexity of doing inquiry in the classroom, meaning that you actually need to collect different sources of evidence from the students as they express their ideas, right? There's not a multiple choice test, for example. And then, of course, how we evaluate inquiry and how well teachers can implement inquiry affects, the research in this area. So for the researchers in the audience, this is also another interesting area to explore. What is authentic inquiry in a science classroom, and how can we show that it improves students' understanding of science? So I don't have any answers for that, I'm sorry, but that is one of the challenges we have. But moving forward in science classrooms, their educators really need a lot of guidance and support in implementing this. And there's one document I've shared with you, The Big Ideas in Science, is really helpful for starting to think about implementing inquiry approaches in the classroom. Also, we need to think about balancing the level of teacher guidance with the information we provide to the students, and of course our students' abilities. And the teacher always knows that best. They know their students best. So there's some great research showing that there's sort of a continuum, a continuum of inquiry. So on one hand, you have that limited choice where you give a student a question to investigate, you give them the procedure to follow, and you expect that they have the same results. That's the cookbook science. So it's not all bad. Sometimes that's a good start, so students get used to the process. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have these open-ended approaches where students create their own questions and design their own experiments. And that's quite advanced. So you don't really want to start there. So we start right in the middle. I'm going to go through some resources that focus on the guided approaches, which might involve, providing a certain amount of questions for students can choose one to explore and then design their own experiment based on one of these questions. And there are many different approaches to inquiry, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the 5 E's because I've done some work developing resources for teachers with my colleague John Kenny, and that is a PDF that I've shared with you, and I will walk you through the 5 E's if you haven't heard of this. And this graphic comes from NASA because NASA has heard of the 5 E's and they like it. Okay, so this is a nice scaffold, an easy to use scaffold at a primary or secondary teaching level to help you think about how to implement inquiry, either in your teaching or as a scientific exploration or investigation. So the first part is really giving students a chance to engage with a different concept through different representations or activities. In this way, you get a sense of what do they know. They can continue to do activities and explore their ideas. And importantly, they're creating their own representations as they go. So after these initial activities, as a teacher, then you start guiding students towards the scientific understanding. So with these 3 areas, typically a very teacher-centered lecture, you go into the classroom and you start writing definitions on the board. What I'm inviting you to do is just to step back and give students a chance to demonstrate, well, how do you think planes fly? Show me how they fly. Can you do a drawing to demonstrate that? And when you look at that, from a teacher's perspective, you're like, oh, either you have an advanced class and they know it 100%, so you can go on to the next advanced activity, or your students are, oh, they're really struggling. They think this is happening. So you go back and help guide them towards that scientific explanation. And then, of course, as students build confidence in understanding scientific concepts, they apply it to different situations. So that's that knowledge transfer. That's getting them to think about applying their ideas to other contexts. And that's a real strong indicator that they have learned the particular concept. So this evaluation takes place throughout. When students are actively engaging and in showing their knowledge through representations, it's very easy to see as a teacher what they know and what they don't know. And you can create tasks. So at the end of it, they are going to create something. For example, maybe it's a design, or maybe it's an experimental design and the lab report that comes out of that. So I have found the 5 E's personally very helpful, and I've used that to teach mostly primary and some early secondary students in universities who are learning to become science teachers. Okay, so again, how can we do all these great interactive things online? Well, there's already some fantastic things online, and I'm sure last year as science teachers, you found some amazing resources. So the 5 E's online, of course, there's a number of interactive quizzes you can do. There's whiteboard, Padlet type software. You can get students to express their ideas in different ways. In terms of explore and elaborate, there's simulations. This is a pivot animator, particularly, I think, useful for physicists. And we even have a COVID simulator where students work through models to understand, well, how do we get these numbers? How do we know if we social distance, we will have less cases? So they actually get to work through that. So back to you, your reflection. Do you consider guided inquiry approaches in your own teaching or as part of your research or policy?
Dr. Connie, your time is 5 more minutes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So science inquiry is very interesting, but not always easy to do. And I have 2 more slides, so this is perfect timing. So at the beginning of this presentation, we talked about that factory model of education and those 4 C's, the critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. And that's influenced science education and helped moved us beyond just content and knowledge. Now, the OECD is now thinking about the next education paradigm. And this is about equipping students for knowledge, skills, attitudes that where students can actually shape their future. So it's that next paradigm, and it's very exciting because students have much more of a role in shaping the future and the world that they want. And this vision, it's beyond the 4 C's in that it has a purpose. And this purpose is enacted through what they call transformative competencies. And I'm going to share, there's 3 of them, but when you look at them, you can see the 4 C's in them. And you can see that students are starting to have a role in influencing and shaping these ideas. So what better way to help support this through processes like scientific inquiry and guiding them along the way so that they develop the confidence to take on these roles. And in my final slide, talking about science, education, and industry 4.0. So this is what this conference is about. And my presentation was really about getting back to the basics of science, such as imagination, creativity, tools, technology, inquiry, and collaboration. And that if we can include more of those experiences in science classrooms, we will be preparing students for Industry 4.0. And for many of the science educators out there, these ideas are not new, but they're not easy to implement. Especially given the pressures of curriculum and assessment. This is why teachers can't do this alone. We need researchers to start opening these spaces so we can use these as evidence-informed practices. And we need policymakers to give us the space so that we can try these innovative approaches in the classroom. So in closing, I invite you to think about how you can support these 3 areas in science classrooms wherever you are in the education system. So these will help develop students' scientific literacy so they can understand the complex problems we're facing in the world and value how science inquiry is used to help solve those problems. For example, why it's important to be vaccinated and why we must reduce our global CO2 emissions. So this kind of scientific literacy will prepare students for the fourth industrial revolution and beyond. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Connie. Sir Connie, it's very inspiring, especially for me, and I believe that every participants that join on Zoom meeting or in the Jayagiri room will be inspired as well. So now I think I will invite first the participants who attend in Jayagiri room. If you have any questions, you can ask questions to Dr. Connie, and maybe the committee in the Jayagiri room can help the participants to ask directly before I read the questions on the chat box. Please. Anyone?
I see some questions in the chat box, so I'll start with that if people want to come in anytime.
Okay.
So people were asking about the year for each industrial revolution. I spent some time looking it up. So there are sort of it depends on the source that you look at. So the slide that I gave, it's a really broad year, but there was a really strong consensus that Industry 4.0 was born in 2016, and it came from an innovation conference in Germany. But these are sort of constructs, so sometimes it's hard to nail down a specific year. I hope that answers your question. So the next question was to emphasize, what do you mean by the language of science? Okay, so that's a great question. And I love this question particularly because that was what my PhD was in. So it's if you think about what is the work of a scientist, and we'll compare that to a work of a musician, we'll say a pianist, someone who plays the piano. So how do they do their work? So they have different purposes, but scientists use different tools and technologies to understand the world, right? So that's where you get all of those models, you get different languages, you get mathematics, and you have all these sophisticated digital technologies to help us see things that are really small and things that are really far away. So a musician doesn't need that, right? They are looking at, they have a wonderful, maybe a grand piano or a baby grand piano. They have the notes in front of them, they have the music, and they have their passion inspiring them. So that you can almost think of these are two different languages. So if we are teaching science to students, they need to start understanding that science is a different discipline, and it has different disciplinary language and practices to make meaning of the world. In the same way, a musician has a different disciplinary language and practice to make music. So that's how it helps me understand the languages of science. Okay, I hope that was helpful. And I'm just reading another question in the chat. I find many teachers are reluctant to take the step. Yes, because of the curriculum standards. How can we empower teachers? This is like the holy grail question of science, because when we have so much research saying that this is really important for student engagement and participation. And then we have research saying, well, this is actually how science is done, so we need to do more of it. But if teachers have so much curriculum to do, and they have these large-scale assessments, it's a challenge. So that's why I invite our researchers to substantiate findings that will support these methods, and policymakers to understand that teachers need space to do this. Now, I do have a practical answer to your question. So those are big dreams for change. The practical answer is you can't always do inquiry or the languages of science or all of these interactive approaches with everything. But I think you can try it at least with one thing so students get an idea of what this feels like. So there are going to be times where you write down those definitions, and there's going to be times where you have the cookbook science, right? But there's going to be a time too where you can just step back and invite students just to explore and play in these spaces. And then you link these ideas. You're like, okay, well, talk about your idea. Why did you draw it like that? And what do you think about their drawing, and what's missing? What else do they need to do to explain this concept? Or why are you doing that particular investigation? And why are you choosing those materials? So even if you can find at least one opportunity in your class as you navigate the curriculum and assessment for students to experience this, I think that's still a benefit. I hope that answers the question. Okay, Mr. Lukman, are there any questions coming in from the rest of the conference?
Yes, I'm actually on the chat box. There is no more questions, but I'm still waiting for the questions from the participants who attend this conference in the Jayagiri. Okay, so please, Miss Amel, who want to ask the questions? Udah tadi.
That's a great question. Can you just tell me what age level you are working with? Grade 7 and 8. Okay. Yeah. So I have maybe two responses to that. The first response is, again, starting off small and having sort of a low risk activity, so they can be kind of crazy and imaginative, because students are not always used to this, right? So you kind of have to guide them along. So, in some space, if it's a low risk, it's not a low risk activity, they can be wild. And the second one is kind of the opposite end of that. If we think of, I'm speaking to science educators here, so I know you're going to be very interested in science fiction, whether it's movies or novels, and there's some really great, crazy novels. And if you read back on some novels from the past, it's like, oh, now we're actually doing that. Somebody used to think those crazy ideas when that didn't even exist, and now we're actually doing it. So on the other hand, I would say sometimes those crazy ideas might exist one day. So yeah, that's my best answers to your question. But it is, it's, if you can imagine if that students have been trained, to write down what the teacher writes, to read and memorize from the textbook, asking them to take a step back and to imagine and create, that's a huge jump for them. So we need to do baby steps, I guess, in a way. Oh, and I will also say this, the links that I shared with you for the early childhood education, so they have a website, they will have resources, they have podcasts, and they have the professional learning. They have some amazing resources on how to do those baby steps. Of course, we're small, young people, but we can borrow that in a primary and secondary science. We can borrow that in for our own classrooms. So I encourage you to have a look there as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Connie. So I think we still have time for one more questions. Any questions from the Jayagiri room? Miss Amel? Please.
Oh. Yeah, that's great. And I just want to say that the idea of collaboration, that seems all really nice. That's something we want to do in education because, you know, students are getting along. But competition sometimes seems like, oh, should they be competing? And it's certainly both have a role in science. And I will say that both have a role in the science classroom. So collaboration is when you get students to work together in partners or small groups. And for example, I'll give you an example with the representation. So if you get a student to please draw your idea of how does a plane fly? You know, what is the concept of lift? And if you get them to work in pairs and then you give sort of prompts on that conversation. So tell us about your drawing. What does it tell us about lift and what does it not tell us about lift? You can include those prompts and students will get used to talking to each other in this scientific way. So that's how teachers can sort of scaffold a collaborative conversation. Now, if we go to an experiment, again, start small where you have groups of maybe 2 or 3 students doing a very small activity. And in the planning, the teacher scaffolds, okay, so for this, this activity, we're going to take the temperature of water as it boils. So we have roles and responsibilities. Who is going to do what? And students get used to learning how to work together. So that's very cookbooky. It's very scaffolded, but they start to understand that there is a way to work together because sometimes it's not always natural for students. So that's one approach. Now, the competition one, you'll know that in one of the slides, I had a picture of, it was a group of girls wearing the same t-shirt and they created a robotic car. And you know, especially the STEM educators, and I've worked with the Qitep science, we've done solar powered cars and we've had races. So we've built solar powered cars based on materials and everyone, you know, got to choose their own materials. Well, there was the basic kit, but they got to choose their own. And then we did a race, a start finish race, like the, you know, Indy 500 thing, but a straight line. And that competition, you know, sort of got people to think about, oh, how can I make my design more streamlined or faster? And of course, then they were challenged to explain what is it about their design that makes it go faster? What are some of the principles in physics? So that's an example of how competition can be used in a science classroom in a fun way. Okay, I hope that helps. I hope that addresses your questions.
Great. Now for the last question.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Connie. I'm Inege. I'm interested in how the brains work and the correlation with the education. Talking about imagination, I'm interested in that I read that the imagination really has strong correlation with the neocortex and the thalamus, is the part of the brain. Does it mean that imagination can be trained? And how? If we want to train our students' imagination as soon as possible. Thank you.
Yes, that's a wonderful question. And I don't have a technical answer for you. For example, I don't know the biological answer in terms of how imagination or this kind of training will affect the brain. But I know from that early childhood education research that yes, imagination and creativity can be developed. And importantly, you know how people say, oh, I'm not creative? Actually, everyone is creative and everyone has that capacity and it can be developed over time. So again, I invite you to, you know, look at that research in early childhood because they are they're advanced in this area, but also that recent research coming out of the OECD, that 2019 link that I sent you, they're looking at how creativity can sit across the curriculum and how it can be and how it situates particularly in science education. And they have a framework for creativity as well. So different aspects that you can address as you go in your teaching. But from what I understand from the early childhood research is, yes, it can be developed. And the more we do, the better we get and the more confident we get with the ideas that we come up with.
Okay, thank you for your answers, Dr. Connie. But unfortunately, we come to the end of your session. But before we end the sessions, would you mind to have the closing statement, anything that you want to deliver to the participants?
Sure. I just wanted to say, it's really an honor to be here at your conference and to be invited to share these ideas with you. It's very inspiring to see, there's been 20 finalists sharing their best practices and 7 finalists doing the workshops with you yesterday. And you can see that they're just trying one thing and they're having great, success with it. And sometimes they don't have success with it, but the important thing is to try something new. So I encourage you to think about that wherever you are as a teacher, a researcher, or a policymaker. What can you do to create these opportunities for students? Because it's not just industry 4.0, it's much more than that. It's much beyond that. And I think science education has a really important contribution to make to that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentations. It's very inspiring. It's very wonderful that we know that the nature of science can be developed to equip students to face the Industrial Revolution 4.0. It is not the new concept. It's the basic of the science educations, but it's hard to implement. But for sure, we need to try and try. Thank you so much for your presentations. Hopefully we can meet again in other activity. I hope you are well, Dr. Connie, and very good morning.
Good morning to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So ladies and gentlemen, the sessions of Dr. Connie Sircone is end. Now I deliver. Now I pass the for the next agenda. I pass to the MC, Miss Amel, please. Thank you.
Applause to Dr. Connie. Okay, so we still have to keynote address from Ko Chi Kiang and Dr. Zulfikar. But before, we will have a 15-minute breaks, and we'll see you at 10 a.m. Thank you.
Dream come true. In together we fight to solve the problem we face. In collaboration will be the key for our success to face revolution 4.0 industry today. to solve the problem we face. In collaboration will be the key for our success to face revolution 4.0 industry today. Going through the space and break the time to get our dreams come true. Let's brave to do the innovation. Together with Sikis to collaboration. In together we walk to make our dream come true. In together we fight to solve the problem we face. In collaboration will be the key for our success to face revolution 4.0 industry today. Going through the space and break the time to get our dreams come true. Let's brave to do the innovation. Together with Sikis to collaboration.
Gitu ya. Jadi ya, nggak jelas tapi nggak apa-apa juga.
In together we walk to make our dream come true. In together we fight to solve the problem we face. In collaboration will be the key for our success to face revolution 4.0 industry today. Going through the space and break the time to get our dreams come true. Let's brave to do the innovation. Together with Sikis to fight to solve the problem we face. In collaboration will be the key for our success to face revolution 4.0 industry today. Going through the space and break the time to get our dreams come true. Let's brave to do the innovation. Together with Sikis to collaboration. In together we walk to make our dream come true. In together we fight to solve the problem we face. In collaboration will be the key for our success to face revolution 4.0 industry today. Going through the space and break the time to get our dreams come true. Let's brave to do the innovation. Together with Sikis to collaboration. In together we walk to make our dream come true. In together we fight to solve the problem we face. In collaboration will be the key for our success to face revolution 4.0 industry today. Going through the space and break the time to get our dreams come true. Let's brave to do the innovation. Together with Sikis to to solve the problem we face. In collaboration will be the key for our success to face revolution 4.0 industry today. Going through the space and break the time to get our dreams come true. Let's brave to do the innovation. Together with Sikis to collaboration.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the International Conference on Science Education and Teachers Development 2021. So now we have the last two keynote address. I would like to say hi to Ko Chi Kiang. Hi, Ko Chi Kiang. Mr. Ko Chi
Hello.
Kiang.
Hi, can you hear me?
Okay. So
Okay, great.
and the last keynote address we have Dr. Zulfikar Alimuddin. Halo, selamat pagi Bapak. Okay, so I guess we move to the moderator, Mr. Hari Firman. Can you hear me clearly? Mr. Hari Firman?
Yes.
Okay.
It's clear.
Yes. Okay. So the session, the keynote address 2 and keynote address 3 will be moderated by Dr. Hari Firman. To Dr. Hari Firman, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Amel. The honorable participant, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for joining this session. So in this session, we will have two keynote speech. First keynote would be delivered by Mr. Ko Chi Kiang, and then from 10 to 11, and then the second keynote will be delivered by Dr. Zulfikar Alimuddin from 11 to 12. So let's begin with the keynote, second keynote. So before we start, let me introduce Mr. Ko to the audience. Firstly, Mr. Ko Chi Kiang is a lead teacher in physics and school coordinating mentor at Victoria School, Singapore. He got the first place of the second Ki Hajar Dewantara Award in the year 2018. In 2019, Mr. Koh was a member of the physics professional learning team that was awarded the Energy Gold Award from by Ministry of Education Singapore, which is given to school for innovative ideas which enhance teaching and learning. Right now, in this international conference, Mr. Ko Chi Kiang will deliver his keynote address entitled Innovation in Science Teaching and Learning Towards Industry Revolution 4.0 from a teacher's perspective. So, Mr. Ko, time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Give me a bit of time. Okay, all right. Thanks for your patience. Good morning, distinguished guests and fellow educators in Southeast Asia and beyond. I'm Chi Kiang, a teacher at Victoria School, Singapore. Today, I'm indeed very honored to be invited by SEAMEO Science to share my perspective as a classroom teacher on innovation in science teaching and learning towards Industrial Revolution 4.0. But before I begin, I'd like to thank Dr. Connie for her very insightful sharing from the perspective of a researcher. And she quoted many examples, and some resonates in me. For example, STEM in concerns, science communications, and the 5 E's, which I like very much, and I actually use it with whiteboarding for my lessons, incorporating simulations and some smart technologies. By and large, my sharing will be about my humble effort to prep my students for Industrial 4.0. There'll be a little bit overlapping. I think it should be fine. We can revisit some of the key ideas about IR4 and Education 4. Okay. Now, a general outline of my sharing is as follows. I'll begin by setting the context in the understanding of IR4 and Education 4.0. This is followed by how I prepare my students towards Education 4.0. Next, we will explore some important values about education, and I'll conclude on my aspiration for Singapore students or my students. I shall now set the context. Okay, let's watch a short video clip on Industrial Revolution 4.0.
What is Industry 4.0 and what does it mean for you? Technology is driving change across all areas of society. Not only do we increasingly use it and even rely on it in our personal lives, we also find our workplaces digitally evolving, with more and more processes now being undertaken using technology. This change is known as the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 will see many tasks that were once performed by us now being automated. With the collection and analysis of real-time data, artificial intelligence, and the ability for all components of a production line to talk to each other, production can be really efficient and personalized according to customer needs. But what does this mean for us? With increased automation, our time will be freed up for concentrating on more complex tasks. We will need a workforce who are capable of building, programming, and developing these technologies, but also making sure we are applying them to our lives in an ethical way. There are core skills that we can offer that technology cannot replace. The human touch is going to be incredibly important, ensuring effective communication, problem solving, and supporting change management in this digital environment. There will also be a greater need for joint working across disciplines, creating new innovations. The future job market will be looking for graduates with an open mind to explore the unknown future possibilities. We will all need to develop our skills in order to embrace, adapt to this ever-changing environment. What will you do to make sure you are ready and have the right skills to thrive in the Fourth Industrial Revolution?
Okay, we can gather from the video that IR 4.0 is a fusion of close connectedness of artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things, and more. And this close connectedness has a synergistic impact on how many things and processes will change.
Recording stopped.
The IR 4.0 and its influence will lead us naturally to the question on what is the Fourth Industrial Revolution in teaching and learning.
Recording in
short,
progress.
What is Education 4.0? Education 4.0 is a desired approach to learning that aligns itself with the emerging fourth industrial revolution. This industrial revolution focuses on smart technology, artificial intelligence, and robotics. And all of this are impacting our lives every day. Let's watch another video on what is Education 4.0 and how it relates to education now and before.
Education is no stranger to change, perhaps now more so than ever. In Education 1.0, we saw learners as receptacles of knowledge. We spoke and they listened. We gave them information and they regurgitated it. It was a primitive system with little or no collaboration. Technology in the classroom was banned, and information was usually in the form of a stand-up routine supported by handouts, textbooks, videos, and occasionally the World Wide Web. Then came Education 2.0. Learners were encouraged to learn in more spontaneous and explorative ways. We facilitated the learning opportunities, and they gained knowledge by formulating and solving their own problems. Technology was used in basic ways. Wikis, podcasts, blogs, and personal websites enabled learners to directly interact with the online content and one another. A few clicks later, and we entered Education 3.0. Learners now share their knowledge to co-create new knowledge. They have their own access to information, the option to learn virtually, and platforms to easily connect with us and one another. Education is no longer centred upon a back and forth between them and us. Instead, we have been transformed into a coach, advisor, learner and resource guide, providing our learners with the tools and direction to create their own ideas in the digital landscape and beyond. So what's next? We are now on the cusp of a new phase, Education 4.0. This vision of the future of education aligns itself with the emerging fourth industrial revolution. With the world changing so rapidly and so often, we need to ensure that our learners are adaptable and at the forefront of current and emerging technologies. Education 4.0 takes the lessons of Education 3.0 and propels them forward into something much more dynamic. Smart technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, cloud workflows and more are informing change across the board, and we need to embrace and adapt with our learners to enable them to develop the skills they need, not only to effectively use current technologies, but to adapt to and embrace emerging ones.
Okay, after watching this video myself, I asked if my lessons were actually 3.0 or at times 2.0 or even 1.0. But looking forward, I asked myself these questions. Are we as teachers ready for Education 4.0? Are students ready for it too? And are our school systems ready, including assessment? What we know is students need to master skills that AI cannot replace. Teachers need to probably change a bit their teaching and learning pedagogies to help nurture the skills, depending on which level they are, at secondary, at polytechnics or universities. The intensity will differ, I believe. And teachers need to build their competencies to help students develop these skills in a small ways. And we still need students to also embrace sound scientific endeavors and knowing science as a human endeavors, which is, I think, the most important. Having set the context of understanding IR 4.0 and Education 4.0, it calls for my response to prepare my students in small ways towards Education 4.0. The subsequent slides will show how in my school, me and my colleagues give exposure to our secondary 1 students, which are 13 years old, and how our Sec 2 and Sec 3, 14 to 15 years old students experiment with programming, electronics, and some robotic skills. And lastly, how our graduating students secondary 4, about 16 years old, are engaged to apply skills accumulated over 3 years to solve authentic real-world problems. Lastly, how we also look at how we enthuse our students through participation in competitions that were cited earlier in the earlier sharing. And I really find competitions a very good way to engage our students in moving them forward. Okay, for my Sec 1 students, they are exposed to block programming, microbits. We engage their seniors, Sec 2s, 3s, and sometimes the Sec 4s students to assist to conduct the training. They're also exposed to STEM electives, such as drone flying. Again, we have their seniors to conduct the training. Students at secondary 2 or 3 will be given the opportunity to experiment on programming using Arduino or Python. This programming will also involve them working with electronic sensors, CPU, etc. There's also peer sharing and coaching for students to level up each other's technological skills. We also allow students to experiment with robotics through assembly and assembling them and writing instructions to control it. I'll show you one robot assembled by a team of students. Okay. Right. For the secondary 3 students, we would assign them group projects, such as to produce a prototype that, for example, demonstrate physics phenomenon, as you can see in the 2 photos. For our secondary 4 students, we will stretch them by giving them group projects that incorporate design thinking, research, much research, and building prototypes of a smart device, and how they address the authentic real-world problems. We call it the engineering design challenge. The following shows some of the tasks examples that we gave to our students. Okay, I will share 2 projects submitted by 2 groups of students. Okay, the first project involved 4 students working collaboratively to ideate and build a smart device that helps address food security through urban farming. So the idea, they came out with the first idea, which they find a bit strange after a while. Then they move on to the next idea. And eventually, they came to one which they like, okay, which they like. And basically, their solution represent a prototype of a real-world self-monitoring, analyzing, and reporting technology, smart. It has a sensors to monitor temperature, light, and moisture. And this data are fed to a program that is coded by them. The program can make its own decision as to what to trigger, like adding water and so on and so forth. It's something like a simplified artificial intelligence. Below shows a close-up of their designs. The team also applied knowledge of science that we taught in school. They tried to demonstrate, and we requires that. This is their completed prototype. As you can see, there's a CPU, and there's an LED panel, and there's a light sensor, moisture sensor. The brain is inside here. It's being programmed by the students. And the codes, these are the simple codes that they're able to create that does the job. Okay. And this shows the various stages of the process of this group of students. Okay, the second project that I will show is about a group of students trying to address rising sea level, I think, which is very real, and harvesting of energy. Okay, so they're trying to solve two problems with one project. Okay, they submitted a 6 minutes video, but I will just show us about 1.5 minutes. I hope do not mind, which tells us what's their projects like. Okay.
Wait, that's not all. Global temperatures have been hitting all-time highs, causing sea levels to be higher and higher every year, as well as causing erratic thunderstorms that threaten to flood our homeland. As a low-lying island city-state, Singapore is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of such climate change. If we do not adequately prepare ourselves for the increasingly volatile weather, we may soon find ourselves to become a modern-day Atlantis. This is where Wave by Hair comes in. Our energy harvester can serve a hybrid function as flood protection in Singapore. Singapore currently adopts a three-pronged approach to managing flash floods by controlling the water flows to and the holding capacity of such drains. What Wave offers is reinforcement to the receptor part of this approach by providing more robust isolation of important infrastructure for possible floods. This is done by installing Wave along not only the shoreline, but also in our canals. This wave system can then be used to raise flood barriers along these crucial areas to prevent flooding of essential buildings.
As the waves become turbulent, a larger electromotive force is generated. This increases the brightness of the LED, which serves as an indicator of rising tides. The light sensor attached to a microgrid senses a surge in average light intensity, and a servo motor is signaled to spin to pull up a barrier. The barrier is then lowered when the light intensity decreases to allow the residents to have a better view of the coast, mitigating any compromises in aesthetics. This barrier in reality would prevent excess water from flooding the cities. In today's volatile climate, this would be an extremely useful.
Okay, just to also put it, the flooding in Singapore doesn't take place that often, but once in a while we do have that strange flooding at Bukit Timah, okay, which is shown in the video. And the students chanced upon that, and they shared in their sharing in their project submission. And I thought it was very authentic. And so what happened is that the students employed smart technology as like the previous group to address flooding, as well as to harvest energy. And it's a prototype, and it makes a simple form of AI that make decisions and actions. Now we enthuse our students to develop interests and have a broader mind through involving them in STEM-related competitions, such as as you see here, one is by a local polytechnic called Nanyang Polytechnic Science and Technology Challenge, and another one is by SUTD. electric vehicle design challenge, which involved them building up an electric vehicle. In particular, I'd like to highlight the Science and Technology Challenge by Nanyang Polytechnic School of Engineering, which I find has very well crafted, interesting tasks. Sorry for a while. My battery is low. Okay, now, so why I find it good is that the task is able to stimulate students' innovative thinking in the area of critical and creative thinking. And it promotes engineering, science, and instill wonders and passion for them to create things that work and make sense. I can see my students are very focused, okay, in the competitions. The task involves computing, researching into AI. Okay, I will show you the task. Click this. Okay, and computing involving Python, okay, and blocky direct programs. And it also engaged them to think forward, like they were researching into AI and 5G networks. They can't really do that advanced, but they can read ahead and then they write about what they can use to solve a real world problem in their research submissions. And there's another one, which is the using image recognition model. It's a kind of AI tool. Okay, I will share another one of my student submission, which is for the competition. In the building of aircraft, they can fly the longest duration using the least material and powered just by a rubber band. Okay. So this group of students, they win many hours. I was with them, so we know. And many attempts. The 2-3 prototypes, but each prototype there are many attempts. Okay, and countless attempts experimenting on different materials and design of the same shape. They explore alternative solutions to solve the problem. And after bouncing back and forth from many failure attempts, they eventually found a satisfying prototype. So they developed from here. And in the process of making the prototype, they actually stretched their understanding of aerodynamics, the research, and the technical constructions skills. I will show a video on one of their testing of the final prototype.
3, 2, 1.
Okay, then what's the aim of involving students in projects, in-house or externally? Okay, they are as follows. Firstly, is to foster the joy of learning, okay, through STEM projects, and we'd like to attempt new things to help in their development, to nurture a mindset that learning is a lifelong journey. So to keep trying, and then realize that actually they can learn on their own. Explore alternative solutions. So there's no one answers to a problem. There are alternative perspectives and ways to solve the problem. Build resilience. from failures, many failures, keep trying, perseverance, and we can then stretch tasks to challenge them. So projects can stretch our students. Okay, as science teachers, I'm mindful, okay, that the important role I play on instilling in my students the scientific endeavor, okay, which are the values, ethics, and attitudes. And this affects the way they apply scientific knowledge and the types of investigation they will carry out in school and beyond school. We could help spur our students to love science by giving them avenues for them to know science as human endeavors. I came across this website by Science Education for Public Understanding program by University of California, and it's really impressive. And I find it's very comprehensively done with the coverage of professions related to many fields of science. And I read through and I found under evolution one outstanding professor, Gerard Vermeer. He's a professor who was blind since childhood, and he never gave up. He pursued his dream at 10 years old. He was 10 years old to be a oncologist, and of course then he became a biologist, and a very evolutionary one. And in this website, it shows how impactful determinations can transform lives. And there are many other good examples. Okay, I shall enlarge. So, okay, for you to see a bit of the words. Okay, some of the things that he noted in his own personal website through the links. And he really can do a research just by his sense of touch. And it's so amazing. So most of us, if we lost our sight, we will think that's the darkest spot of our life has begun, right? But to him, I think it's different, right? So we can learn from people like him. And there are others, for example, Lynette Rock, a professor in physics, and she shared what motivated her calling to be a teacher. Because her teachings at universities, but it's still fundamentally the same. And students might identify with her and will pursue science, deeply, and maybe one day become professor in biology, chemistry, or physics. Okay, we are living at very challenging times with COVID and the IR4. These are shaping our future and our students' future. And to help our students thrive as science teachers, we can try in our humble ways to impart some important values. So these are some examples. It's not exhaustive. So as one is joy of learning beyond grades. There's dynamic nature in education. Learning is lifelong. Failure is an opportunity for growth. And approach problems from multiple angles. Okay, at this juncture, thanks for being so patient listening to me. I'd like to do a simple poll. Okay, you can pick up a handphone or notebook and access menti.com and type the code 3091-100, and please select one value that you would identify most. Okay, So I'll give ourselves about a minute to think, then respond. So could you all see my menti.com website? Mr. Harry, can you see it? Can, right?
Yes.
But oh yeah, the number comes in. Thank you. Okay.
So the audience, Mr. Koh, inviting you to respond.
Oh, to chat, is it?
Okay.
Maybe I can respond at the end. I'm ending very quite soon. Okay, I love to see some. Yeah. Okay. Learning is lifelong. Is shall I give ourselves now 30 seconds? Then I will give my little comment and move on.
Okay, we have 11 response.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the post showed though lifelong learning is something we really feel that our students should embody. But there's actually no one correct answers. It's very context dependent on our classroom profile. Okay, so there's no right or wrong. It's just the emphasis. So to me, every one of these 5 are important. And at different times of my teaching, I would have to emphasize on one of them. Okay, I shall now return back to. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Can I share again? Okay. So lastly, I'd like to conclude with my aspiration for my students using a framework popularly known as a Swiss roll in Singapore. Okay, I think some of you might have seen it. At the heart of this framework are the 6 core values, namely respect, responsibility, resilience, integrity, care, and harmony. And we know values shape behaviors and help them develop. There are 5 social competencies, and namely self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management, responsible decision-making. And I'm also mindful that of developing my students in their 3 sets of 21st century competencies, namely it's a list: civic literacy, global awareness, and cross-cultural skills, critical and inventive thinking, which is actually quite linked to science, and communication, collaboration, and information skills, again, very closely linked to science as well. And together, these core values and competencies, I hope will help my students embody 4 desired outcomes of being a confident person, concerned citizens, self-directed learner, and active contributor to the society. And hopefully this should help them better at capitalizing in the IR4. Now, in summary, I'd like to highlight that again, the Education 4.0 is a desired approach, okay, desired approach to learning that aligns with the IR4. And we ought to, in a small ways, prepare our students towards it through a bit of some innovation in our teaching and learning. And while doing so, we should not lose sight of the important values and aspirations for our students. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koh. I think it's quite interesting presentation. Yeah, you provide us with the real model how to deliver teaching science in the era of industrial revolution 4.0, right? And also you provide us with the framework of Singapore in dealing with the education, particularly in science education. Okay, we have 20 minutes for discussion, for question and answer. So I'm inviting the participant in the Jayagiri room first to ask a question for Mr. Koh. Bu Amel, is there any?
Okay, so we have two questions first.
All right, okay. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chi Kiang, for your presentation. It's so outstanding presentation. So I would like to ask to you about how did you deliver your concept before your student doing the project, and how is the important, best of your thing, the diagnostic non-cognitive assessment before we do our learning. Thank you.
Could you mention your name, please?
Okay, sorry, my name is Maidi Afina. I'm from Bengkulu.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for the question. I guess if I can rephrase this, basically how we prep our students for the project by getting them ready in the theory, conceptual part, right? Most of the projects that we assigned, the student would have learned some theory on it, like especially the secondary 4. They already gone through 3 years of learning science, and for example physics, and so they know the concepts. Right? So now is the time to do the project. But again, to do a project, if it's going to be one that deliberates a lot on skills and collaborative learning, working together, we will nurture them at the earlier years. For example, Sec 1, right? They actually were exploring, so they gain some basic skills, broad basic skills, and then Sec 2 they experiment, they go a bit deeper, Sec 2 and 3, and then they learn. Not everyone will learn very deeply, but by and large, most of them will learn something. And then when we put them to group work, like in a group of 4, there'll be at least 1 or maybe 2 who are quite good at the technological skills, and maybe another one will be good at research and writing, and others, they can try to help in presentation. And as a whole, they deliberate on each other's strength, and then they can do a group project. Of course, as teachers, when you're doing project, we cannot just hands off. We need to monitor, facilitate their project at different juncture. And then when they present, we will give them feedback so that they will learn and move on. Yeah, so I hope I answered your questions.
Okay, thank you. And second, please, second question, please. Could you mention your name?
Okay, thank you. My name is Widya. I'm from South Sumatra. I teach senior high school for 10, 11th, and 12th graders. At my school, it's so hard to do a collaboration work with other teachers. And so I prepare my students during I'm a chemistry teacher, so during chemistry sessions and also out of the session times, yeah. But if you could give me at least how to engage other teachers to do a collaboration work, because collaboration work is really needed by our students for Education 4.0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, sorry, ma'am. If I don't get you wrong, you're asking about how to collaborate among teachers, and another one is among students, right? So, if for among teachers, I think we need to set aside time, like white space, for teachers to meet and to brainstorm what are the tasks, projects that we want to set for our students. In my school, we have time, we have professional learning time, where we meet. All of us are free during that, maybe an hour, and either during curriculum time or just after school, where physics teacher or chem teacher or biology teacher or other subject matters, they will meet and brainstorm what are the things they want to do for students, curriculum. Okay, so for mine, I work closely with my subject heads and other physics colleagues, and we think through what are the things that's relevant, that we can offer, and then we do not create everything ourselves. Actually, we can learn quite a fair bit from others. We need not reinvent the wheel. So to create collaborative work for students, there are examples out there. So many schools, share, but then it has to be contextualized to our students lah. So we cannot like wholesale and then apply it to our students, like mine too. Okay, so I have to consider whether they are ready, how much can we stretch them, how much time do they have to complete the project, and how much guidance can I provide. And another factor is the resources. So, and the most important is that it has to be fun, challenging. So the task needs to be a bit challenging, not overly challenging. It has to be challenging. So there's this spirit of want to achieve something. So when the student can do it, I think they will want to work together to solve it. If it's too complex a task, I think they might just say we can't do it. Yeah. So teachers need time to meet, to discuss, to ideate, and then to check with other school teachers, and then you can even collaborate beyond your schools. You can work with other schools, and we same like-minded people. Like Singapore, we have the physics chapters, zonal teachers meetings. So we do meet up and then we think of nice, interesting teaching pedagogies. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Okay, thank you. And for those of you who participate through Zoom, I invite you to give or ask question. Please put it write down and on the chat. Yes, okay. Yeah, we have still plenty of time. Yes. Is there any other question? Yeah,
Yes.
please mention your name and your institution.
Okay. My name is Meta Indah Agnestia. I'm from Semandua Padalarang, West Java.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Koh, I'm wondering how you delivered about the coding for your student in this project, or maybe the student must have a basic skill about the coding, and then we as their teacher guide and improve their skill, or how? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. The coding or programming, I say has simplified through the years. When I was a student, when we do coding, it's really, really tough, like C programming and basic programming or even machine language. So that's very tough. But through the years, we have coding has evolved to very object or block programming, and it's quite intuitive. It's very human. It's like, if this what happened, if that what happened, right? So actually, it's not very difficult. Some simple English is involved in most of this programming because they are English majority, most of it. So for our students, right, some of them would have learned a little bit when they're in primary school. Okay, because some primary schools do have some of these interest groups where the students do some basic coding, and so when they come to us, we do have some we can call it little expert students, while others may not know anything, and we do provide coding for them, and it's actually conducted by our students. The very first batch of students we actually do it for them, the teachers, and we also engage external help. And after the first group of students have mastered it and they are very good into it, we actually can tap on their skills and interest to impart to the juniors to help conduct lessons. So as teachers, we need not be the one conducting all the time. We can empower our students to do it. And I think it's a very nice experience where seniors teach the juniors. We build the kind of very nice school culture. So coding, I must say, is not difficult, especially dealing like microbits kind. The Arduino Python will be a bit more challenging. And if you can get vendors to help, that would be good, especially the first year of implementation. Subsequent years, you can leverage on your very expert students. Okay, you would have many. If you implement it at one cohort, right, there will be quite a number. And given that our students are digital natives, I believe they will cling on to it like very easily, right? Yeah, much easier than us. Okay, I hope I assure you that it can be done.
Okay. Bu Amel, is there any other question?
Is there any other question for those in this Jayagiri room? Oh no, I think there are no other questions in
All
this
right.
Jayagiri room.
Okay, so because no question anymore, then we'll end your presentation.
Sure.
Thank you very much for interesting and inspiring presentation. Yeah, a lot of
thank you very much.
information that you give us in the seminar. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed this seminar to, if Dr. Zulfikar already here. we move to Dr. Zulfikar.
Yes. Hello,
Okay.
Pak Hari.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. Yeah. The keynote address will be delivered by Dr. Zulfikar Alimuddin. So before his presentation, I would like to highlight the curriculum vitae of Dr. Zulfikar. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Zulfikar Alimuddin is currently the Director of Highly Functioning Education Consulting Services, an organization that is aimed at helping schools to transform their policies and programs, especially in the area of teaching and learning for teachers. He also the director of Global Islamic Boarding School, GIBS, located in South Kalimantan. Yeah. He got Bachelor of Engineering in the field of Aerospace Engineering from Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, RMIT, Melbourne, Australia, in 1995, and also master degree in strategic management from Prasetya Mulia Business School in Jakarta in 2011, and Doctor of Science in management from School of Business and Management, Bandung Institute of Technology in 2021. So congratulations for your doctorate. So right now in this international conference, he will deliver his keynote address entitled Education of Now in Industrial Revolution, a much needed preparation. So Dr. Zulfikar, time is yours.
Okay, thank you Pak Hari Firman. Bapak Ibu semua, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the time. It's a big honor for me to be able here to present here in front of you. And I hope what I'm going to present will bring some more inspiration to every one of us. Pak Hari, please allow me to share screen.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, could you see my screen now?
Yes, clear.
Okay, I have 40 minutes to present. Is that right, Pak?
Can be more, no problem.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. Bapak Ibu semua, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm addressing Indonesian Muslim. Salam sejahtera for everyone else non-Muslim. I'm very delighted to share here. Before I start my my presentation, everyone, let us reflect. Let us reflect in our own life when we were back as students, and when we were much younger. When we went around, we played. For Indonesian, we know what we call lomba balap karung, right? Or what do you call it in English? In that kind of competition, if you remember, when we do it during 17th of August celebration, you know, everyone has fun, right? And when someone falls, when we fall down, right, we always get up and try again. Now, the question is, what happened when we went to classrooms? When we were given tasks by teachers, when we couldn't finish the task, did we have the same motivation as like when we did balap karung? Did we get up? Did we try? Did we push ourselves to do our task? Now look, that's what happened when we were back then. Now look at now. Look at in our classroom. Look at our students in our classrooms. Did the same thing happen again? You know, the fact that we were not as motivated as lomba balap karung, like what we have when we do in class, now do we also see that in our students? What's happening? What is the main difference? Why would we have such high energy when we do a balap karung, and we lost totally the energy when we go to classes, when our students go to classes? And if we have to be honest with ourselves, sometimes we teachers also lost the energy and motivation when we go to our classrooms. Why is that? Now, how is this related to the title that I have now about education now and Industrial Revolution 4.0, a much needed preparation? Before I go further, we know that what's been happening now, the latest quote unquote development, to me it's something called some kind of revolution, is metaverse, right? The question again, what was Mark Zuckerberg thinking? What drives him to think, to create what he calls metaverse? And how is this related to the fact about our lack of motivation and the lack of motivation among our students? And then the next question is, what should we do as teachers? If Mark Zuckerberg could think of metaverse, what should we think of? What should our students think of? This is basically the idea that I'm going to share to you today, based on our best practice in our schools and also some brainstormings among teachers and trainers of HAVEX. Now, this is what we hear every day, right? Students also hear every day that the world changes. We are presented with a lot of facts, right? But the question is, how do these facts resonate in our mind, right? How would these facts affect us, affect our thinking? More importantly, because we are teachers, how would we bring these facts to our students so they would also, these facts also would resonate somehow in their minds? All facts just stay as facts, or even worse, facts becomes as intimidation for students. What is the difference? You know, there are three states, right? Facts as just facts, facts as ways of provoking their imagination, or facts come as intimidation for students. These are in our hands. Now, I think if we talk about sustainable development goals, you know, we've been talking this, I think, for more than 10 years, everywhere, also in our country, Indonesia. And the latest, I think, one of the initiative by the new government, the minister, the Indonesian education minister, was to introduce AKM, assessment competency minimum. I suppose it's all related to these sustainable development goals. And for the fact that in our country especially, we are ranked number 70 out of 77 countries in terms of literacy and numeracy. And to make it even worse, that fact hasn't changed much in the last 10 years. So what's been happening, right? To me, I feel like I want to slap my face all the time. You know, as educators, as teachers, what should we do? Because no matter what, these students come to our class, their fate somehow are in our hands. Why so? Because as I said before, we could present the same facts, but how would those facts resonate in the minds of students? So much depend on how we actually deliver, what types of pedagogy that we use, what kind of activities that we get students to do. what kind of dialogues that we bring to the classrooms. So those facts would resonate differently. Essentially, one of the key principles that we have to ask ourselves, how do we translate all these messages into meaningful messages to our students? And before that, how do we make them meaningful to ourselves? Now, there's one big word that on the top, happiness. I asked you before about reflecting when we did balap karung, right? Lomba balap karung during celebration of 17 August. Now, if we look back, think back, reflect it back, do we see anyone in the field with sad face or everyone just happy? Now, if we look the face of our students in classrooms, now, what does it mean to us? Theoretically, we know, right? We know that students would open their limbic, their mind, to hear, to listen when they're happy. Right? Now, if we see not happy faces every day in classroom, we know at the very start that we fail, that the teaching is not effective. Yet we keep teaching, right? To make it even worse, I said, teachers keep talking, not even teaching, right? Or keep explaining, keep bombarding students with information. So let us take our deep breath again, reflect and see what we have been doing so far, right? This is basically encapsulating what I just, resuming what I just said before, right? Only in the real terms, after doing all this reflection, knowing at least one main symptoms, the look of our students, their faces, their expressions. Then how should we turn all these issues, problems, and challenges into our teaching scenario? At HAFEX, we call it teaching scenario, or maybe now in our Indonesian system, we call it RPP 1 lembar, right? In that teaching scenario, we should exemplify, we should explain, we should write down all the classroom activities. So before we actually go to our classrooms, we have to look at our teaching scenario and think of ourselves. If we are in the situation in the classroom with all those activities, would we have happy faces or not? Will we feel happy or not? If we are not even happy, how could we expect our students to be happy? And if they are not happy, no learning. As simple as that. Now, at the start, I also mentioned about Mark Zuckerberg, metaverse, right? I think earlier speaker, I think the very first, I think Dr. Connie, she also mentioned about imagination, right? Now, what is the power of imagination? Now, if we relate this again with this lomba balap karung, why would people, every one of us, be happy and motivated, and we fall, we get up, we run again, we try again, but not in classrooms? One of the if I go back to you and I ask you, I think many of you would agree with me if I say, why we have that kind of happy faces and energy when we do balap karung? Because we know the purpose exactly. We know the end line, and we know what we're going to celebrate. We know that people would cheer us up, all the way during the competition, and also when we hit the finish line, right? So there's a sense of purpose. they know exactly what to do. We know exactly what to do. We just have to do balap karung, you know. One purpose, certain activities, and imagination what we would get if we finish the line, and especially if we win the competition, right? Now, again, I also presented some facts before. Now, how would we actually bring all these facts into our classroom such that these facts would bring imagination? These facts would create purpose. This fact would translate into activities that students are familiar, so they know exactly what to do. Now, all these are what I call curated facts, the facts that we have prepared into certain activities. Then we call metacognition. You know? And if you go back to Anderson-Pravul taxonomy, if we check later on, I will show you again. I will show you also that in terms of knowledge dimension, we know the lowest level of knowledge is fact, the highest is metacognition, right? I think I had also a question before in earlier session. How would we help students to understand facts? How would we help students to bring facts into metacognition, right? We know that there are two levels between facts and metacognition. That is conceptual and procedural. Then the challenge for us is to go to conceptual level from factual levels. We need dialogues. You know, when we were born, when our children are born, you know, could they talk? We don't talk when we were born, right? How do we learn? How do we learn? You know, we know that our parents smile to us, but do we know that it's called smile? We don't, right? Someone tells us, hey, this is smile, this is sad face, these are hands, you know? So there's simple dialogues like that. But to go to conceptual, procedural, and metacognition, it takes more dialogues. It takes more meaningful dialogues. It takes more what I call sometimes curated dialogues. And I think I've seen many classes, I've observed many classes, including the classes in my school beforehand, and still some happening now, you know. Teachers sometimes lack of the ability to provide meaningful dialogues, right? And I think one of the main reason why this is happening, because many teachers or some teachers get so much bogged down with text, with textbooks. Many times teachers present the content of textbooks. We forget that the contents of textbook are not easy to understand for students. So when teachers explain the contents of the books, textbooks to students, this explanation comes as facts, you know, verbal facts, facts that students hear, but they comes as intimidating facts, not provoking energy facts. So then, how should we handle this? How could we help ourselves, you know, to improve our dialogue? So when we present material to students, what we present are not facts which will intimidate students, but facts, but dialogues which provoke energy, which provoke motivations, which provoke metacognition and imagination amongst our students. Now, of course, we would have some learning methods, right? One of them is we could have project-based learning. This is what we also have been studying in our schools, and now we are intensifying this project-based learning. Of course, it's not the time for me to share. I guess everyone here would just Google and might have also some experience in project-based learning. But what I'd like to underline here is that even when we do project-based learning, we need to make sure that we bring the right dialogues in the project's learning. Otherwise, the project-based learning would only help students to make handicraft, to make craft, to make science projects, to make science objects, but not having the meaningful senses of what's going on. So let us do some exercise. If I could ask you, everyone, to write on the chat box, if we talk about global warming, what is the very first sentence, instruction, or question, if you like, to say in front of our students, so they would have imagination? If I say, hey, good morning, students. Today we will talk about global warming. Global warming has been caused by the by gases, by toxic gases, which flies around. I think this is not the right way. Filling up our atmosphere. Is that a sentence or explanation to provoke imagination, or is a sentence explanation to create intimidation? Let me see the chat. Let's see. I'm inviting you, everyone, to write on the chat column, so not to give you a chance to break from me, so you could do something else, not only listening to me. Let's see, Pak Hari Firman, if
yes,
to share.
We invite the participant to respond to the what Pak Speaker mentioned.
We have one here from Pak Muhammad, I guess, from SMP Rona Bakti. Do you feel that the season or the weather around you is uncertain? Okay, great. Thank you, Pak. My only question to you is this an open or ended close-ended question? Okay. If I could just humbly, please allow me to ask you, if you want to turn this into more elaborative question to help students have to have more open-ended, open mind questions, how could we turn this question into open-ended question? I know actually if you have something else after this sentence, you can say, please explain. Of course, it could be like open-ended, but I know. I was just like asking everyone else, if we could do something from this sentence. Because my main idea today is about how we could actually bring dialogues into classroom, So like us, like when we meet in families, during our dinner or arisan, we need to have open dialogue, right? Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Someone else there? From Irene, Miss Irene Chi. Yeah, a lot of low-lying countries are experiencing flooding nowadays. What do you think this is happening? Okay, I think it brings more motivation for students to think, about factual issues. Yeah, okay. Miss Irene, if you want to push more to create imagination, right? What would you say? I believe you might say your question is also provoking imagination. It's true. Only to me that it kinds of ask students to think more analytically. Because some students, not everyone is smart. Because that kind of this kind of question, maybe smart students can answer that. What is one question that anyone in the classroom is willing to answer the question? Okay, from Brunei Darussalam, show a 2 minutes video and then okay, right? Okay, we leave it there. Let's go ahead first. Yeah. well, at least you have one takeaway from me. Takeaway points, a question, not anything but a question, but then we could bring any other topic, right? Now, again, our main topic today, education now, education future, right? If we think back, why is this important for us? Well, I think everyone also agrees with me if I say that the future is in the hands of our students. Look at us now. 15, 20 years from now, I don't think we have very important roles in this world anymore, right? We might still be alive, but we don't have much thing to do. These students, our students now, will be in charge, right? Now, look at in the last 2 years, this pandemic came along. Were we ready when pandemic came? How long did it take for us to cope with pandemic? What if something even worse happening in the future? You know, now in the last month during G20 leaders meeting, they talk about global warming. You know, even now when the population of the world is less than 8 billion, we have these tremendous issues. You know, what will happen in the next 10 years? So what I'm saying is, we know that the challenges, problems in the future will be even greater than what we have now. So we should equip our students with the ability to imagine, to think of future, and yet start think about what they should do now. They think of future, they have that imagination, and that provokes them, that propels them to learn, to prepare themselves. This is, I think, for me, and I think everyone might agree, the biggest challenge for us, right? We are preparing our students, we are empowering them to be ready for the future, right? So this is more like a summary why we need imagination and metacognition. If I just can elaborate the basic difference between imagination and metacognition. Imagination can be very wild, can be anything. But metacognition is imagination which is built based on certain facts and then with certain dialogues, so that facts could be translated into concepts, into procedures, into creation. This is metacognition, like what Mark Zuckerberg did, right? Like, if I have to say, like what I did, what I and my team did, you know, to create HAVEX. HAVEX was established in 2017. I was assigned as director of the school in 2015. When I came to the school very first time with engineering background, I did observation in the classroom because I don't think I was an expert, right? Then I spotted problems. From those problems, I had to think what is happening, the conceptual issues about the problems. Then I had to think about what I should do. Then I didn't have imagination, that metacognition. Oh, then I need to create certain or new teaching method. I need to do certain procedures to help my teachers to improve their teaching, right? And I shared that metacognition with my teachers in 2016. I said, hey, let's learn together. One day, we will share our findings, our methods with teachers across the country. Boom, it happens. That imagination happened. That metacognition happens in 2017. We started going around. Then after HAVEX, pandemic came along last year, 2020, we created guruinnovative.id. I would invite everyone later on, you know, to log into guruinnovative.id. There you would find a lot of teaching materials, you know, for free, yeah, videos that might give you more inspiration about teaching methods. What I'm saying is, I and my team also came out of problems, you know, problems in classrooms, problems like global warming problems, right? Now, from problems in classrooms, then the imagination was how to help teachers, right? But to do that, then I have to turn the facts, the problems in classroom, into conceptual issues. What are the pedagogical issues? Then I have to turn into procedural, what we should do. Then we come up with creation, the metacognition about what the final outlook. Then we come up with HAFEX, then later on guruinnovative.id. So even when the pandemic came, of course, it was hard for every one of us, but that came to us also as a blessing, you know, because we thought pandemic, there was only HAFEX. Pandemic, there had been Guru Innovative. We thought Guru Innovative, we had to go around the countries like 2019 to introduce our methods. But with Guru Innovative, with pandemic, with Zoom, then everyone could meet in one room, everyone even around the world could meet at one time without too much hassle, right? Now, again, I guess the previous speakers from Nanjang, I guess, show a lot of technical methods, you know, science engineering methods about what students could do in the classroom. I talk a lot about the dialogue, what we could, how we could help students elaborate or even accelerate or improve or push their imagination, right? Now look at these figures, right? We have Habibie, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Ki Hajar Dewantoro, right? Or in the world stage, we have Elon Musk, we have Obama, we have Mother Teresa, you know. Let us ask ourselves, as teachers, what is our metacognition, right? If we only go to classroom to teach with the textbook in our hands, right? The question is, do we have metacognition? Hello, Pak Hari?
Yes.
Okay, because I see your face frozen, Pak. So I thought I was
all right. Okay.
So, please allow me to invite every one of us to reflect, think. Yeah, if we teach every day using our textbook, you know, and then we ask ourselves, hey, then what is my metacognition? Then if we don't have our metacognition, right? How would we expect students to have metacognition? We could only help people after we help ourselves. We could help students to bring their metacognition if we could create our metacognition. So what is my lowest level of metacognition? Right. To me as a teacher, my one-page teaching scenario, which I'm sure could help students have meaningful activities, could help them have some happiness in classes, could help them have motivation, you know, the urgency to finish their task. That's my metacognition, you know. Again, these are just some topics that you could bring students to provoke their thinking. Yeah. Now I'm saying this, who plays the biggest role? Yeah. Who is that person, everyone? Teachers, right? Why teachers? Because there's no massive scale activity in this whole world except classrooms. Students going to classroom every day. In our country, there's more than 60 million teachers, 60 million students go to classroom every day, handled by more than 3.7 million teachers in Indonesia only, right? 5 days a week, 7 to 8 hours a day. Think about it. So again, how we present facts, whether they encourage motivation or they intimidate students, are like, black and white, you see. This is what I'd like to invite everyone of us again to think, right? And then help each other, like through this session, share our practices, then help our students, right? Before I said about happy face, right? If we don't see happy face, sometimes we see, let's just say flat face, right? But then students, do they pay attention to us, right? Paying attention does not only mean that they look at our face, right? But they will answer when we ask questions, they do things when we give instruction, right? So they basically stay alert, especially the Z generation, the Alpha generation. They don't look at faces usually, but they hear you, Why? Because they tend to look at gadget most of the time, but they stay alert if whatever we say resonates in their mind. Now, I've been talking from time to a lot of things about teaching, and HAFEX. We develop what we call teaching mastery framework. There are 8 competencies that we believe teachers should have to be able to teach effectively. So we don't talk about right or wrong. We don't talk about bad or good, right? But we talk about effectiveness. Effectiveness, like right? We could achieve the goals, right? We know we have learning goals, we have learning outcomes, right? Now, I'm coming to the end of my presentation, right? I'm showing you a topic, right? What we call density, right? We usually teach density in the senior high school, right? Or maybe some in junior high schools. But the question to us is, how early could we introduce the concept of density? Why do teachers in the senior high school struggle a lot just to get students to understand the concept of density, right? Could we introduce this concept much earlier? How do we bring this concept into kindergarten students, right? We could see there's a lot of connection, interrelation from kindergarten to senior high schools, even to university study about density, right? I have in my hands now, I have, can everyone see that I'm holding a jar, a jar with biscuits in there, right? Everyone can see that, right? Now, if I talk to my kindergarten students, hey, students, everyone, look, what do I have in my hands? No? How do I introduce the concept of density to my students with this a jar of biscuit, right? Now I say to them, look at this. Is my jar full? Oh no, sir. Now talking about imagination. What if you represent that biscuit in the jar, right? My question to you, how many of you would go into this jar and stay happy? Do you want everyone to be in the jar? Or how many of you want to be in the jar? What do you think all these biscuits are feeling? Are they feeling happy or they feeling so what's the word? Congested. Congested. I have to find a better word for than congested. So that kind of to me that dialogue, I leave it to you everyone to see whether that kind of dialogue would help them to not only to relate the concept of density and also to imagine. Why? Because I said, hey, what if you are the biscuit, you know, and you jump into the jar, you see, right? How many of you want to jump in the jar at the same time? Right? Of course, I have limited time. I will not go further to translate that activity all the way into learning activities, learning outputs, and learning outcomes. Yeah. In junior high school, no, this is what we start. This is usually what teachers write on the whiteboard. You know, density is mass divided by volume. Now, everyone, if we look back, you know, when we were in we were in classrooms before, you know, at school, what did we feel when our teachers wrote these nomenclatures, yeah, these words on the whiteboard? Did we feel happy? Did we feel inspired, or did we feel overwhelmed, or even worse, did we feel intimidated? You know, and teachers keep explaining over and over again. You know, and when we go to senior high schools, we have the concept of molarity, solubility, charge density. It's all about actually density. You know? Only that I can talk about the number of jars in the numbers of biscuit in the jar, or we can talk about the number of bottles in the box, or the number of people in the classroom. It's all about density, or the number of if we put water in here, the number of sugar in the water. And also about the concept of conservation, right? I think I said earlier, when we were just born, or now our kids are born, we talk to them, we smile to them, we introduce some words. That words stays in our mind, no matter what, right? Now, what does it mean? It means the earlier the intervention is the better, right? So how could we again, you know, bring all these concepts much earlier? Of course, in the right way, in the right pedagogy, including the concept of conservation, right? Because when we go to senior high school, this is the continuity principle about thermodynamic. It's all about concept of conservation, right? So everyone, to end of my presentation, think about one topic, right? One topic of your own subject, and think about one activity that you could do in your classrooms, and one line of dialogue that you could bring up to your students to promote their imagination, such that steer their motivation to learn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zul. Interesting presentation. You begin with the philosophy of lomba balap karung, and happiness. Happiness push everybody to make effort to arrive the purpose, right? And we have to translate to transform to the classroom situation. Dialogue, imagination, keywords are very important for you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to question and answer. We have still plenty of time, so I invite everybody to ask question for Dr. Zulfikar. Yeah, in the chat there is participant from Jayagiri room, Mr. Endar. What is assessment to know effectively metacognition?
Okay. Should I answer that right now, Pak Hari?
Yes. Okay, sure.
Okay. Pak Rizwan, thank you for the great question, Pak. I think many of us teachers, right, when we open class, we ask students like this. Let's say I teach democracy, right? like let's say I teach democracy. Oh no, I teach sociology or PKN, right? And I ask students, hey, students, good morning, right? I say, what do you think of democracy, right? What do you think of democracy? And students say, oh, I like democracy, sir. Now, this is related to Pak Rizwan's questions. How do we assess, is that an answer at metacognition level or not, right? Now, if I can talk with Pak Endar, is that your question, Pak? Before I go further, before I discuss further, I just want to make sure.
Pak Endar, could you explain? Oh, sorry, bukan Mr. It's not Mr.
Miss, ya.
Miss.
Mr. Yes, it's Mr. Endar.
Okay.
Silakan.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Mr. Zulfikar.
Yes.
Yes, it's a question from me about what the assessment, what kind of assessment to know the actively meta connection.
Yeah.
Because
yes.
I think it's hard to know.
Okay. Now, Pak Endar, thank you, Pak. Pak, please stay tuned,
Okay.
Pak. I need to talk to you.
Okay.
I give you an example before. Let's say if I'm a teacher, right? I open a class. I ask question. Oh, Pak, what do you teach, Pak? What subject do you teach? Do you teach, Pak?
Yes, I am teach science.
Science,
in
right?
junior
What
high school.
science, Pak?
Sorry?
What science? Is that you teach a junior or senior high school?
Junior high school, so
Junior high school.
integrated science.
Okay, great. Give me one topic, Pak.
Maybe about density.
Density. Okay. Okay. What question, Pak, do you usually bring to students when you open the class about density? What question, Pak?
Okay. I give the small what I
Indonesian language ya, Pak? You teach in Indonesian student ya, Pak?
Yes, Indonesian
So
student.
you ask like anak-anak, siapa yang tahu apa itu density?
Okay, can be use bahasa? Okay.
Yes, sure.
Oke, biasanya saya bawa balok-balok yang kecil-kecil itu, tapi ukurannya sama.
Yeah.
Kemudian saya taruh ke tangan anak-anak. Coba nih, ukurannya sama ya, kita ukur ya 2 cm, 2 cm, 2 cm. Tapi ada yang kayu, ada yang plastik, ada yang logam-logam.
Yeah.
Saya kasih dulu tantangan anak-anak. Ini ukurannya sama. Ini kira-kira sama berat tidak? Nah, jawabannya kan macam-macam. Kebanyakan rata-rata anak jawabnya karena ukurannya sama. Sama, Pak, katanya. Saya kasih ke tangan mereka. Oh iya, beda ternyata. Saya giring-giring lagi. Baru saya jelaskan ini tergantung kerapatannya atau disebut dengan density atau apa massa jenis gitu ya, kerapatan suatu massa. Itu yang menyebabkan walaupun bendanya ukurannya sama, tapi ternyata massanya berbeda-beda. Baru saya masuk ke rumus gitu, Pak. Biasa sebegitu.
Sekarang pertanyaan saya, ini kan Bapak bilang, Bapak bawa balok-balok tuh ya, ukurannya sama, bahannya beda-beda. Bapak kasih ke anak-anak, ya. Terus Bapak bilang ukurannya apa? Ini beratnya sama apa enggak? Gitu kan?
Ukurannya sama, tapi masanya sama apa tidak gitu?
Iya, ukurannya sama, terus masanya sama atau tidak, gitu kan? Bapak bilang begitu. Terus mereka bilang ya macam-macam lah jawabannya. Terus Bapak bilang, saya giring-giring lagi, terus saya jelaskan dan kasih rumus. Begitu?
Kurang lebih begitu, Pak.
Saya mau tanya dulu, Pak. Giring-giringnya itu gimana caranya?
Pertanyaan menggiring maksudnya, Pak?
Iya, kasih saya 3 contoh pertanyaan, Pak.
Kan tadi mungkin mereka menjawab, oh, saya jadi ditanya balik. Iya. Jadi jawaban anak sih rata-rata tidak sama, Pak. Rata-rata anak jawabnya masanya sama, Pak, karena ukurannya itu. Jadi setelah saya coba, oh iya beda. Kira-kira apa yang membuatnya berbeda? Anak-anak nanti jawab, bahannya, Pak. Terus saya giring lagi, emang bahannya kenapa? Yang satu jenis ini, satu jenis ini. Kan belum mengenai kerapatan partikel. Tujuan saya sampai nanti anak-anak pikirannya ke kerapatan massa atau jarak antar partikel. Tujuannya ke sana, tapi kan anak SMP pengetahuan mereka belum sampai ke sana. Jadi digiring terus sampai mereka sama-sama kita temukan konsep kerapatan massa atau jarak partikel.
Ya.
Begitu maksudnya giring-giring.
Saya tanya-tanya ini bukannya mau nyusahin Bapak ya. Tapi kan kalau nggak ngobrol gini nanti saya jawab Bapak sekedar iya Pak terima kasih tapi nggak dapat apa-apa sebetulnya ya kan. Saya suka dialog begini. Jadi nanti betul nggak Bapak terasa sendiri nggak bahwa nanti teruji metakognisi. Nah sebelum nyampe ke sana Pak, kan Bapak bilang tadi mau memperkenalkan kata kerapatan gitu. Tapi dalam semua aktivitas Bapak tadi, yang bagian mana yang membuat siswa berpikir tentang kerapatan?
Ketika dia membandingkan antara balok-balok yang ukurannya sama, tapi ternyata terasa di tangan lebih ada yang berat, ada yang ringan. Bahkan saya bawa neraca Pak, dilihatin ke anak-anak. Ini berapa gram. Jadi dari sana kalau larutan biasa sih itu yang saya gunakan Pak, bukan larutan.
Waktu balok-balok itu mereka timbang, mereka bisa melihat kerapatan nggak?
Sayangnya itu kan abstrak ya Pak, saya pikir.
This is the key. Ya. Jadi kalau kita mau menguji metakognisi kerapatan, pertanyaannya kita menyajikan fakta tentang kerapatan tidak? Coba sekarang Bapak tarik nafas sebentar, Bapak lihat jari Bapak. Bapak lihat jari-jari Bapak dulu. Bapak mulai pikirkan bagaimana menyajikan jari-jari Bapak sehingga siswa bisa melihat yang namanya konsep kerapatan.
Maksudnya jari-jari gini Pak?
Ya, coba. Apa yang Bapak lakukan pada jari Bapak saat untuk membedakan perbedaan kerapatan?
Ini renggang, ini rapat gitu. Oh gitu.
Oke, ya.
Iya.
Bisa begini kan?
Memang agak sulit tapi biasanya saya bikin Pak kotak, terus saya bikin bulat-bulat. Ini partikel. Ya, jadi ini kurang lebih partikelnya berarti rapat-rapat kalau besi gitu ya.
Kalau Bapak buat kotak dan Bapak gambar, Bapak kan menjelaskan.
Betul Pak.
Ada dua masalah di situ Pak sebetulnya.
Iya.
Sebagian besar siswa tidak ngerti kalau itu adalah benda 3 dimensi.
Iya, tidak semuanya memiliki persepsi yang sama, itu yang kita susah memastikan betul.
Kalau persepsinya sama jadi guru kayak Pak Endar sudah. Tapi dengan jari. Kalau Bapak angkat 4 jari Bapak bandingkan yang kanan dan yang kiri. Bagaimana Bapak bertanya pada siswa? Silakan saya angkat tangan saya. Anak-anak, lihat 2 tangan Bapak. Ada 4 jari di tangan kanan, 4 jari di tangan kiri. Apa perbedaan susunannya?
Iya, jadi jawabannya misalnya satu renggang, satu rapat gitu kembali.
Nah, ya. Kalau tadi bicara imagination, ya. Sekarang 4 jari Bapak ini yang rapat, bisa nggak Bapak masukin dalam kantong?
Rapat bisa.
Yang renggang bisa nggak masukin dalam kantong?
Tergantung kantongnya Pak.
Tergantung kantongnya.
Besar bisa. Tapi anak-anak pasti jawabannya nggak bisa.
Ya, tidak apa-apa gitu ya. Yang jelas mereka sudah melihat. Jadi kata kerapatan sudah mereka bukan hanya melihat, tapi mereka bisa lakukan. Terus Bapak minta mereka bisa ambil pensil ya, pensil kumpulkan gitu ya, atau ambil batu di luar, masukkan ke dalam kantong. Tanya berapa isi full kantongmu itu, atau ambil kotak ya, ambil sebuah kotak. Tadi kan Bapak buatnya balok-balok tuh, ambil kotak ya, kemudian minta mereka masukin batu dalam situ. Tanya, sudah penuh? Sudah. Bisa nggak dibuat supaya nggak sesak? Gimana caranya? Kita tahu Pak jawabannya, tapi kita baiknya bertanya. Oh ya Pak, dikeluarin. Sekarang sesekan mana? Terus masukin kata itu, rapatan yang mana batu di dalam box tadi. Jadi konsep rapat. Nah, di situ Bapak bisa bilang setelah itu, batu-batu ini bisa menggambarkan molekul-molekul di dalam balok ini. Ya. Atau berarti Bapak ganti sama kapas juga boleh, karena kan Bapak mau bicara massa jenis.
Yeah.
Dalam proses ini, nah setelah Bapak lakukan, kan tadi fakta disajikan, ya konsepnya dibicarakan dengan bentuk kegiatan. Jadi terbangun konsep. Prosedurnya Bapak minta mereka mengukur. Setelah mereka mengukur ukuran box, berat, masing-masing jumlah barang, benda di dalam box, terus Bapak tanya di metacognition. Apa yang kamu pahami atau apa yang kamu jelaskan tentang kerapatan? Mereka akan mengeluarkan penjelasan yang agak lebih panjang, Pak, dari bahasa mereka sendiri.
Sesuai pemahaman mereka sendiri gitu, Pak.
Dengan pengalamannya, prosedur yang mereka kerjakan sendiri, dengan konsep melalui proses dialog yang Bapak ajak sambil melakukan kegiatan. Kalau nanti mereka jawaban mereka masih kotor, apa ya Pak? Kayaknya saya belum paham nih Pak, kerapatan itu apa Pak ya? Ulangi lagi prosesnya dengan aktivitas berbeda. Jangan pernah kita menjelaskan dengan bahasa kita sendiri. Karena nanti siswa merasa jawaban kita yang benar dan mereka mencoba menghafalkan jawaban itu. Inilah the calamity, ya. Awalnya kehancuran kemampuan berpikir karena siswa kemudian menghafal jawaban gurunya. Demikian Pak Endar, semoga membantu ya Pak.
Okay, thank you.
Terima kasih. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pak Endar. And is there any other question from Giri?
We have 2 questions here.
Yes, sir.
Silakan Bapak bisa maju kemari.
Please mention your name and your school.
Okay, thank you very much for giving the opportunity to us. My name is Ismail Haryanto. I'm from SMA Darulum 1, Jombang, East Java. I would like to ask about cognition, metacognition. Really, I'm still confused. Is metacognition and metacognitive same? And secondly, metacognitive or metacognition sometimes as skill, sometimes as strategy, and sometimes as knowledge. So what is metacognition?
Okay.
Because I know from taxonomy of Anderson's said that taxonomy metacognitive is one of type of knowledge that must be combined with the cognitive process like create, evaluate, play, and other. So how about that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you say your name Pak Ismail?
Ismail
It's Pak Ismail. Pak Ismail.
Okay.
Okay.
Metacognitive is adjective, metacognition is noun. As simple as that. Yeah, they represent the same thing. Yeah, either it's adjective or noun. Now it's about meta and cognition, right? Meta is something that you define for yourself, right? But it has to be supported. It has to be validated. It's different from opinion, right? So I just give you an example like this, just like the previous example I said about democracy. If I ask my students, hey students, what do you think of democracy? And they say, I don't like democracy. Democracy is bad. That's opinion, not metacognition, right? What is the right answer for metacognition? Of course, there are many answers because metacognition depends on individual, depends on their journey, depends on their procedures of thinking, right? And also depends on their bias. Now, talking about bias, okay? If I am a person of support of democracy, this is what I would say. Democracy is a way to ensure that everyone can have their right, can have their voice heard. Demokrasi adalah satu cara untuk membuat setiap orang memastikan suaranya terdengar. This happens because democracy provide avenues through through election, through votings, where every individual is treated the same. One man, one vote. This way, democracy ensures everyone has the right way to say their opinion, right? If I don't like democracy, right? There are people who don't like democracy. I say, I think democracy is a way of confusing the right and wrong, because in democracy you have, let's say you have two people in the same room, one is knowledgeable, one is less knowledgeable, but when you want to vote for a bill or legislation, the less knowledge or knowledgeable person are treated the same way. This way, I don't like democracy. Those answers are what we call metacognition answer, because metacognition at the highest level. Underneath metacognition is procedural. So if I have to answer metacognition questions, I have to be able to elicit. To elicit is to articulate something at the procedural level, right? Now, to be able to articulate that procedural level, I need to understand the conceptual level, right? Underneath procedure is concept, right? Now, how am I able to present concept? Because I see and understand facts the lowest. I see during election, everyone can have this, can do voting. If I want to have make decision in a group of people, everyone has the right to vote, those are the facts, right? So I need to make interrelation between these facts about why is everyone given the same right to vote, right? Oh, because they have the human right. Humans are the same. Humans have to be treated the same, no matter whatever they think. Okay, that's the concept. Now, how do I ensure that every human is given the same chance? Then I make procedures. I make the procedures of voting. I make the procedures of general election. But I know there's a risk of colliding between right and wrong. That's the fact that I have to swallow as well, right? So in my metacognition, if I was raised in a family, in an environment where everything goes well based on democracy, then I say I like democracy because democracy has given me the chance to voice my right. But if I've been nurtured in an environment where I see a lot of bad things because people have the same right, I would say, oh, because of the same rights, right and wrongs are collided, and I don't like democracy. That's my answer, Pak Ismail.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Wamel? Yeah. Another question?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zulfikar. I'm so interested with your presentation. I ever follow your training in HAFEX.
Mention your name, please.
Yeah, my name is Maidi Afrina from Senior High School number 9, south of Bengkulu.
Okay.
Well, in basically, every student is unique and have different characters. So, how could we to learn them with the different character and give them more motivation for them? Because in the class, when we tell about something, so many students have no response. So it come to us as a teacher to say something again. So it a teacher center. Yes, right? Okay, so maybe you can explain to us how to guide the abilities for the student to deliver their abilities, their knowledge, because we know that